Each week in the Easter season, we read our first reading from the Acts of the Apostles. Normally, during the rest of the year, the first reading is coordinated with the Gospel. But in the Easter season, it's a little different because we want to hear about the activity of the early church. And that's kind of a shame today because this Gospel that St. Luke gives us today, the passage of Jesus' encounter with the disciples on the road to Emmaus, is probably one of the most beloved passages of the New Testament. And there's a wonderful Old Testament passage which I think St. Luke very much had in mind as he wrote this. And that is the third chapter of the book of Genesis, the fall of Adam and Eve. And there's a lot of parallels that I want to kind of walk us through today. First, what is the act of the fall? It is Adam and Eve eating from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, eating the fruit. And what happens? Their eyes are open. What happens here in the Gospel? The disciples' eyes are opened when Jesus breaks bread and shares the Eucharist with them. There is apparently good food and bad food. Food that leads us away from God and food that leads us back to God. After their eyes are opened, they realize they're naked and they hide from God. And we're told that God comes to walk with them in the cool of the evening. He finds them hiding. In the Gospel, we're told that Jesus comes to walk with the disciples on the road to Emmaus. And while he's not hiding from them, they're prevented from recognizing him. But in both cases, God comes to walk with us in our time of need. In Genesis, as we said, they hide themselves from God. In Emmaus, God prevents their eyes from recognizing him. The punishment, or part of the punishment for original sin, is they're cast out of the garden. They're cast out of this place where God and man encountered one another. Jerusalem is the holy city. It is the seat of the temple. God's footstool amongst his people. It's the place where Christ dies and rises from the dead. And it's interesting that these disciples are walking away from Jerusalem. They're walking away from salvation, just as Adam and Eve did. Now, Jesus finds these disciples debating all this stuff that had happened. They knew all the data. They knew Jesus was a prophet, mighty in the sight of God and of the people. They knew that the rulers convicted him and crucified him. They know that the women found the tomb empty. They've got all the data points. But they somehow can't put it all together. So Jesus talks with them and explains to them, beginning with Moses and the prophets, how not just this passage of the Old Testament or that prophecy of Isaiah applied to him, but how all of Scripture applied to him. And yet, they still don't recognize him. They get to Emmaus, they invite Jesus in, he breaks bread, and only in that Eucharistic sharing, only in the receiving of that Eucharistic food, are their eyes opened. And they're opened just in the opposite way of the way the eyes of Adam and Eve are opened. Right? Adam and Eve's eyes are open to their nakedness, to their shame. The disciples on the road of Emmaus have their eyes open to the presence of God and their salvation. Again, there's good food and bad food. Good eating and bad eating. Adam and Eve grasped at the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Jesus offers the disciples the Eucharist. Remember my annual homily about how we receive the Eucharist? You know how I don't like the body snatchers because they're grasping at God? We don't do that. We receive. That original sin of Adam and Eve is grasping. The salvation of the disciples comes from their openness to receiving. And what is their immediate response to receiving Christ in that Eucharistic food? They get up and they return to Jerusalem. They return to their salvation. They announce the good news. Because finally they put all the pieces together. They don't just know about Jesus anymore, they know Jesus. And that's what makes all the difference. Is knowing Jesus. So, for you and I, in these confusing times, it's good that we know our catechism. It's good that we follow the Ten Commandments. But as Pope Benedict says, that's not enough. It's not enough. We have to have an encounter with a person. And that person is Jesus Christ. And that encounter happens here at the Eucharistic table. And I know that's why so many of you are suffering at this time, because you can't be here at the Eucharistic table with us. But you can offer yourself as an acceptable sacrifice to God every day during this crisis. You can be Christ for your brothers and sisters. That's who we're called to be. We're called to recognize the presence of Christ among us. And to do so, we need to make sure we're eating good food. Scripture, Eucharistic bread and wine, and that communion we have with God in our prayers. God bless you.